Code 8. The warrior stands in their pain. The warrior bears their wounds well. Their scars carry a beauty that only sacrifice can create. There is no true warrior who has not known deep pain. I think so oftentimes the message of Jesus has been distorted or diluted. We've somehow tried to convince people that if they chose to follow him or trusted him with their lives, that they would finally find a way to be free of pain or disappointment or failure or loss or grief. But there is no path in life that can avoid the valleys and the dark shadows of human experience and human existence. Jesus never offered us a way around pain. He never offered us a way around disappointment. He never offered us a way around suffering or hardship. He never turned them into virtues. There are some people who try to act as if sacrifice is a virtue or suffering is a virtue. And the scriptures never tell us that suffering is a virtue. What the scriptures do tell us is that we can find virtue in our suffering. Sacrifice is a choice to live your life for something more important than yourself. Sacrifice is the ultimate expression of love. And Jesus himself stood in the greatest sacrifice we have ever known, to give his own life for the good of the world. He gives his own life so that we might live. And it tells us in the scriptures that it was for the joy set before him that Jesus endured the cross. There was no joy in the cross. There was no joy in the suffering. There was no joy in that sense in the sacrifice. It was for the joy set before him. It's what he saw as the outcome of that suffering. What he saw was the outcome of that sacrifice that brought him great joy. And so there isn't a spiritual masochism here. There isn't I'm spiritual because I'm suffering. I'm spiritual because I'm standing in my pain. Everyone stands in pain. Everyone will face moments of suffering. Everyone will face moments of loss. That's not the virtue. It's the power to find joy in the midst of that suffering. It's the ability to find hope in the midst of the pain. It's the ability to find intention in the midst of the sacrifice that elevates the warrior to the highest level of humanity. The warrior stands in their pain because they understand that only as they walk into that pain can they walk into their greatness. Can they step into their intention? And I've known too many people who believed that God was the escape route from pain. And so later they became embittered with God. They became disillusioned in their faith. I've known so many people who have lost their faith because of something that happened. And in fact, most of the people I know that once had faith and now have given up on faith never came through that journey because of some intellectual pursuit or because they finally had stepped into a higher level of understanding or enlightenment or intellect. It's because they faced a disappointment in their life, because they faced a pain in their life, because they felt as if God let them down, did not show up, didn't come through. And so that moment of pain was actually the loss of faith. But the reality is that many people have gone through the same amount of pain, the same amount of loss, the same amount of disappointment. And if I would dare to say so, even more. There are people who've gone through more pain, more disappointment, more loss, more grief, and yet came out with more faith, with greater trust in God, with a greater, deeper, more profound relationship to the creator of the universe. And in fact, did not lose sight of Jesus, but actually saw Jesus more clearly. And this is perhaps the most important aspect of the way of the warrior, is to understand that It is the way of the warrior because there's a battle ahead, because there are struggles ahead, because there is a war that rages that you have to step into. You cannot run from. Eventually you live long enough to realize that every time you run from a battle, you always end up going full circle back to it again. Every time you run from a crisis or a conflict or a challenge in your life, you actually never escape it, you just defer it. And what I've learned over my lifetime is when you're facing a challenge and you run from it, the next time that challenge is bigger or maybe you're smaller. But in either case, it becomes more difficult and more ominous than it was the first time around. It was now just over 2 years ago when I faced the reality that I had cancer, and my family and I faced the reality of potential loss, and each one of my family handled it so differently, and it affected them in different ways. And even now, just processing this as more time passes, a part of that journey was deciding how I would face that moment in my life, face that moment of disappointment. It had been so easy to say, wait a minute, God, I'm trying to be faithful to you. I'm trying to live a life that brings you honor. I'm trying to live within the intention and calling that you've created me for. I mean, if anyone should be exempt from cancer, God, shouldn't it be me? And I think that really the most honest response is, why should it be you? Because if anyone lived out their intention, if anyone lived out life most beautifully, if anyone lived out the life they were created to live, it was Jesus. And his path did not find him another way except the path of suffering and betrayal and pain and loss and sacrifice. Then we should all be pretty clear. There's a war ahead of you. It's a war within you. And that war within you will not be won without struggle, without pain, and without scars. I've always thought it's such an odd thing that so oftentimes people who are bearing what seems to be unbearable pain oftentimes begin to take on the practice of cutting. They begin to cause themselves more pain, because what happens when you're drowning in your pain is you begin to lose the ability to feel any other human emotion except pain. So if you don't learn how to stand in your pain, you actually begin to drown in your pain. What you never want to do is to find yourself only being able to experience the most negative human emotions. You don't want to find yourself only feeling anger, only feeling bitterness, and only feeling despair, and only feeling loneliness, and only feeling disconnection, and only feeling anger, and only feeling rage. Once I had a friend who was an artist, and all of their art was dark. All of their art was informed by violence and anger and rage. And I once asked him, why are all your paintings so expressive of the darkest human emotions? And he said, because as an artist, he was committed to only creating art that's authentic, and he wanted to express authentic human emotions. And he spoke of other emotions like, well, happiness or joy or hope, as if they were superficial, artificial. And I finally pressed in and I said, is it possible that emotions like hope and joy and love and even happiness could be authentic, true human emotions? And I remember when he paused, and it seemed to almost confound him, to confuse him. I could feel him processing this. And he looked at me and he said, that thought has never occurred to me. If the thought has ever occurred to you that that love could be the most profound, the most authentic human emotion, I think you need to step back for a moment. Because see, this chapter, this code that the warrior stands in their pain is not a chapter that is supposed to guide you to despair. It's not a chapter that should lead you to some sense of nihilism or hopelessness. In fact, what I want you to realize is that this may be the most hopeful code of the warrior that exists. See, the warrior is able to stand in their pain because they always see hope in front of them. The warrior stands in their pain because they never lose sight of joy. The warrior is able to stand in their pain because they know that everything they long for, everything they were created for, stands on the other side of that pain. So never lose sight of the greatness that's within you. Never lose sight of your destiny. Never lose sight of your calling. Never lose sight of your power. There is love ahead. There is hope ahead. There is joy ahead of you. Pain is just the vapor you have to walk through. Pain is the siren that calls you out and lets you know that this is not the end of your story. There is healing ahead. There's strength ahead. There's love ahead of you. There's hope waiting for you. Jesus is no longer on the cross. That cross is empty. Jesus is no longer in the grave. The tomb is empty. Jesus is alive and well. He stepped into the pain, stepped through it, conquered it, healed it. And now he offers us that same path, that same way. Through your cross is your resurrection. Through your death, there is new life. Through your pain, there is healing. And through your sacrifice, there's a new beginning. The warrior stands in their pain and they rise above it.